Okie dokie. Hello again, guys. I decided to jump back online and just finish the Tech to Cool talk because there is a couple of more issues, things, situations that we need to talk through just to make sure people understand the difference and the essence of certain terms, and maybe it will give just a little bit of that education to those who are keen on finding out about, technical terms and the actual use of the words and understanding of parameters of you know football tactical terminology. Um, so sorry, I'm just gonna make sure that we have the sound here because I'm not sure if you can hear me. Just give me 1 second, please. Yep, no, all good. Looks like we do. Um, Excellent. So before we have stopped at talking about pretty much separating all things formation and all things system, and that was in part one. So please check that out. And we finished with the fact that formation is a skeleton, a spatial scaffold. Let's put it this way: system is a dynamic entity, and it is ever evolving. It is interlocking, and it is encompassing and promoting various tactical behaviors. Um, Basically, formation again is just the looks. It's the static image, what it looks, and system is essentially what it is and how it functions. Um, so if you serious about um, analysis, if you're serious about any kind of tactical, not tactical talk, you must internalize things like that. You have to do a little bit of self-education and study beyond just playing Football Manager and listening to football commentary from online personalities, BBC, whatever. You know, do a little bit of digging, work a little bit in the environment um, to understand what you're actually looking at, because you cannot describe what a team is doing if you don't know the difference between structure and functions. If you don't understand the difference between the shape, uh, tactics, operations, and strategy, or how they interlock and how one leads into another. Uh, you have to know the difference between numbers and nuance. Let's put it this way. Um, so right now, I would like to jump into a few more things that are very much abused and talked about without really understanding what they are and how they actually work. Um, we need to get into that conversation slightly beyond sort of kindergarten football level. We need to move away from that buzzword tactical discourse that is happening all around media space, online, other communities. Um, uh, let's not. If you guys watch this, I hope it will help you to stay away from parroting the terminology. Um, it will help you understand the consequences of the distortion of the term, and will keep you away from either consuming lazy analysis or delivering lazy analysis. Um, let's do a sort of a deeper session. I wouldn't call it deep dive because it will take us hours and hours, but let's just scratch the surface of um, probably two or three key things here. I would like to talk about dynamic dynamic systems versus formations. I would like to talk about distinctions between position roles and functions on the football pitch. Um, I would definitely would like to talk about the forever favorite double pivot. It's just It's insane when every time people say that, I have no clue what it actually means. Um, yeah, and maybe if one thing leads into another, we'll talk about something else. So yeah, let's talk about that. Well, since kind of we finished in double pivot, let's start with double pivot. So um, double pivot, it is very much. It's not an overarching term. When people just throw it around, they see two midfielders and they say, "Oh, a double pivot." Midfielders can be defensive, can be cams, can be a combination of both, but they just say it. It's a specific positional mechanism first and foremost. It's not just two players playing doubling up in one area of the pitch or sharing a position or taking turns. It usually involves, in everybody's understanding, and it is true, it doesn't involve usually two midfielders. People like to think it's sixes and eights usually, um, and they do operate at the same horizontal line. I'm only talking about. Let's talk about just the horizontal line for now. Um, you guys can see me okay? Uh, yeah, there was a weird thing go. It's for the chat. Yeah, so they work on that horizontal line, and double pivot is mostly applicable in build up only. So we need to separate build up and defense. And there are different kinds of defense as well, where you can use double pivot in defense, but it kind of changes the nature of it. Um, so what double pivot is used for? Because people throw double pivot in any phase of the game, in any system, in any situation, pretty much. But double pivot is usually used to stabilize the possession, not create it. I highlight again. It doesn't increase necessarily your possession in the midfield. It's used to stabilize the possession. It smoothen out the what's called anchor transitions, and it provides again what's called a rest defense. So let's call it a static defense. Double pivot, for it to be true double pivot, needs to be embedded into the build-up patterns. It cannot exist on its own. So if your team struggle with possession, if your team struggles with use of the midfield, I'm simplifying things here again because just like I said, if I go into detail of everything, we'll be here for days, literally. I can talk about it for days. If you're if you embed this process, this concept of this mechanism into your build-up patterns, your midfielders simply stop existing and like standing and playing next to each other. They start feeding off one another, and it becomes very organic. And they start connecting to other players on the pitch because double pivot is useless if you're not utilizing um, various angles. That because 2 points whether staggered, horizontal, or vertical, they offer more angles than one effectively. So they need to start using that. And it's a living creature. It's not a static creature. It's a mechanism. Mechanism is living. It's operating. It's moving. Well, I guess for examples, you don't have to go far. You you look at the famous Spain. My favorite style of football. It's the Busquets and Alonso. That's your classic double pivot. There is heaps of examples. You just take any sort of positional combinational plays based team, and you'll find them there. Um, but to all those who throw the term around and talk about double pivots because they think it sounds cool and they see like two midfielders and they call it double pivot, double pivot. It's not, and I highlight it's not two players tracking back at the same time or staggered. It's not two central players near each other on any angle, and it is not two defensive midfielders. Okay, so those are not double pivots on their own. If you're watching a team that is defending, let's say, they defend in a flat 4-4-2. 4-4-2 is relatively simple to understand for everybody. And you see both CMs retreating in a tandem, again, whether they staggered or they leapfrogging. Uh, that is not a pivot. That is not a pivot. That's what's called mirror defensive coverage. So they continuously are maintaining depth control support triangles, and depending on where the weak side, strong side is. So please, people online, especially who use the term, start understanding what you're talking about. At least get the basics of it. Um, the rule of thumb, to sum it all up, double pivot is not simply a presence of two players within the same pitch, the same zone, the same role, or similar role. It's a mechanism in a build-up phase. It's not a visual, let's say, it's not a visual representation or coincidence of a player of a player positioning. It has to be functional and it has to be embedded with the system of play in a certain phase, in a certain area of the pitch. Double pivot can be formed with wingers as well. It can be worked with defenders and midfielders. It can be worked with attacking players as well. There is multitude of combinations of double pivot. Okay, limited by your imagination as a coach. Hence, we can blend it in nicely into details of functioning role and a positional label. Um, how to make it more? It's very it's challenging to explain it so that it becomes transparent. Let's put it this way: football roles, players' roles, must be understood in the context of a system behavior. You have to understand the function and the adjustability and the adaptability of a player within a systematic model. You don't base that role on the formation graphics. Okay, you ignore the dots on the screen. That's not that's the biggest difference. So, for example, a lot of people throw a term box to box. Oh, he's box to box midfielder. What they mean is that he covers the ground. He runs a lot. And you like I've experienced that. It's like, okay, box to box. Like, what does he actually do, the box to box? And it took me a while to understand that people don't get it. Like, people talk about football for years and they don't know what it's like. You ask them a simple detail, like, tell me what is box to box midfielder? Oh, he covers a lot of ground, attacking responsibilities, defending responsibilities. It's all great if you're a 5-year-old. That role, box to box midfielder, it spans a lot. It's a third man. It has element of third man link ups. It has an element of second wave or what's called the late box entry. It has an element of vertical shuttles. Stop doing this for me, please. It has an element of vertical shuttles. It's basically a box to box midfielder or a box to box player is a living incarnation of phase bridging between the zones. It's the person who is a living link between the zones. If a person doesn't provide a third man link up between the zones, both diagonally, vertically, and horizontally, he's the person who is just going to get tired very fast because he's going to run a lot and he will be behind the play every time. Hope that makes sense. So whenever you get somebody who is even on the Wrexham team box to box, people call a lot of players box to box. They're not, and they can't be because the way Parky is playing box to box is pretty much not applicable. There is no need for the link up for the third man link up. The link up is done through long ball onto the head of a tall forward, and then winning the second ball. Um, who else can we talk about to make it? That's a very good point. Overlapping run. Okay, always they talk about overlapping run into the channel. Oh, the like left and right. Great combination of words. People love it. Basically, what they mean is that uh, somebody runs past. Um, you when you play football, even on the amateur level, you always run past, and you run past on the wings, and you run past in between the players too. And sometimes people just accidentally end up in half spaces. Overlapping run. Easy way to remember it is overlapping run is only considered an overlapping run when it separates, splits, widens, fractures the defensive block. It it does it usually by drawing, by inviting the markers, and it needs to by doing that. What it needs to do, it needs to facilitate either what I call the underlaps or diagonal progressions. So just running past somebody, you cannot call it a channel run or an overlapping run. Sorry, I'm kind of getting taken away here because I just hear it over and over again. Um, to connect to that, we can talk about diagonal options quite often involve the reverse nine. It's a lot of the time when you start sort of studying the build up lateral and diagonal concepts in the neutral zone, in the middle third and going up. False nine becomes a big conversation straight away. Um, Again, Wrexham buys players now. Strikers attacking. Oh, he's going to be a false nine, or attacking midfielder. What people mean by false nine usually when you ask them, oh, it's a striker who drops deep and likes to be a little bit deeper, and then he moves up and has that game in front of him. No, no. If you uh, basically what a false nine is, and that is a very good thing to know for pretty much anybody who likes football, is a forward who has the freedom of vacating its space in the central area, and he will manipulate. Sometimes he has to do it a few times to make sure that center back do catch on. He will manipulate center backs, and he is the one who, by manipulating the center backs, will allow. Jesus Christ, it just goes dark on me. Can you guys? I hope you can hear me. So he will allow for an overload pretty much on demand in zone 14. Okay, so it's it's the role of the false nine is not just to drop deep. If you drop deep, you don't become a false nine. You become a false nine when you allow rotations and overloads in a certain zone. Usually it's zone 14. It can be, it can vary. That's what creates a false nine. Um, hope that makes sense. Uh, who else? What was the? Was somebody else? A diagonal. We got false nine. We got the switches. Let's drop down a little because of what if you if you correlate the top third of the pitch and the bottom third of the pitch, inverted fullback. comes to mind. So it's like the two opposites, right? Um, you hear it all the time. Again, when people say inverted fullback, is a fullback who comes inside. That's what they usually mean. A fullback, inverted fullback, is the person, is the player who usually steps into the midfield. Let's call it a midfield because it can be quite a big area during the build up. And his job, so you only become an inverted fullback. It's not when you really nearly decide to venture up from your fullback position. Your job, if you are a real inverted fullback, is to provide for temporary pivot points and overloads in the pre-designated part of the pitch. So usually it's zones 2 and 3. An inverted fullback is a very important part of a possession-based play, just as important as central double pivot or lateral double pivot. Just naming a position does not describe a function. And many people confuse the role with the zone. Don't just look at two midfielders sharing the zone and call them a double pivot. Some coaches probably hope that the double pivot will appear on its own if you play two people next to one another in the same area, but it doesn't. That leads me to talking about all that. We need to talk about how it all ties in with the fact that formations are no longer static and systems are no longer static. Modern teams, modern teams do not play in a formation anymore in any meaningful way and in any meaningful sense of that word beyond a couple of seconds after the start of each half. Let's put it this way. The entire modern concept of football is based on modularity. Okay, so it's based on it's it the real name of it's TPM, tactical phase modularity. Very similar to military practices, actually. Um, I like how people just pop in and out. Sorry, guys, I probably am boring you with all this, but please, please have a patience. Even if you don't like me, just sort of cover my face or turn the video off and just listen to the audio or read the automatically generated words because you need to know it. If you're gonna be talking about football, especially being all tactical and shit, you need to know it, at least some of it. Coaches, modern coaches nowadays, not only in football but in other sports too, they design the systems with what's called a multi-phase fluidity. Okay, so again, remember how I mentioned through my previous videos about phases of the game? That's one of the first things that you look at. Phase of the game is very important because it dictates everything else. And one phase of the game, the certain things are they would seem correct, and the next phase they are completely incorrect. Players need to adapt and adjust their positioning very, very fast. But multi-phase fluidity is a concept. It's the team that morphs shape and structure depending on a few factors. The most important one probably is the ball location. So, final third, again, I'm going to simplify things because already half an hour in. Um, let's say final third converts to a 2-3-5 or 3-2-5 for positional superiority. In defensive third, you drop to a 4-2-3-1, for instance, or 5-4-1 out of possession. And again, it's not going to be quite those sort of dots on the screen, but that's what it's going to look like if you take snap shots as you go. Next factor is the opposition pressing scheme. Okay, that involves triggers, what triggers the opposition, how committed they are, intensity of the press, and effectively their capability of creating an overload in press and where they choose to do it on the pitch. So if for example, if the opponents press 4-3-3, you invert one fullback. If they press 3-5-2, maybe you need to split the pivot and you need to drop CB in the midfield, right? So it's one of those things that you have to be fluid with it. Third factor, I would say, probably it will be the context. Sorry. What I mean is that it's going to be match, like a game context. So if you're leading, you flatten to say a 5-3-2, and you'll absorb the pressure and you will compress. You try to compress the spaces and stay compact. If you're trailing, you shift into 3-5, let's say, and as an extreme example. Three players, three extra players to flood with. Let's put it this way. Because you got your back three, and then your strong side winger will be quite high up the pitch by default. So I hope that paints a more or less sort of clear picture. Clear as mud. Defensive phase, shape. Let's say it's shape versus press structure. Your out of possession shape is not a mirror of your in possession shape. A lot of people think that it is. For example, in possession 3-2-4-1, out of possession 4-4-2. So mid block, pendulum press, for example, or you got to be shifting vertical zones. It also depends on who you're playing against. So, but at the same time, you can have 4-1-4-1, for example, with strong with strong ball side overload, and in transition you will have 2-4-4, for instance, with gegenpress, for example. So yeah, those are just like options that come to mind. Pressing structure and defensive block shape, they are entirely different concepts from formation, I mean. So one is a static, so a static block. The other is dynamic, hence the name, the mechanism or pressing structure. So important to remember that there is always that difference between static and motion, fluidity and stillness. Nowadays, there is a lot of examples. Like if you follow, De Zerbi, he demonstrates technical fluidity very well. So he provokes into the press traps. He loves using his third man combination zones, and he's really fluid with his systems, and the so-called, let's call them, formations change up and down the pitch dozens of times. Bottom line is, the team starts, say, in 3-4-3, only on your phone screen, or on the screen of your laptop, or on the screen of your TV where you play your FIFA. On the pitch, it's a continuously moving, evolving, choreographed dance of challenging challenging for spaces, exploring spatial principles, asymmetric correlations. So football is all about asymmetry. You are always striving to create asymmetry because that helps with creating overloads, helps with uh, effectively distributing the ball around and progressing up and down the pitch. And of course, conditional triggers. So it's that continuous process of adjusting to the situation. It's a living organism, just like I said many times before. Um, we need to again go continuously keep on coming back to that. But um, when people think that they're talking tactics and they just casually misuse terms, it is a big problem, especially when they try to educate other people or share some kind of information. Most fans, most people who listen to online personalities, to people on BBC Talk, they are not curious enough, they're not inquisitive enough to ask things like what phase, for example, am I watching, or does this role that the player is performing does it contribute to positional, qualitative superiority, or is this movement that they are executing right now is it pre-instructed? Basically, is it automatic or is it reactive? Or at least what zone is player operating in? So when you don't ask at least one or two of those questions, and on top of that, you experience a misuse of the term or not understanding, not I'm not even talking about the full depth of the term that the person is, just the surface depth. It leads to illusions. It leads to misunderstanding of the game as such because all they see is two CMs. They call it double pivot, and they keep on parroting it and repeating that. They see fullback drift central, for example, it's inverted. Um, they see a striker press. For example, a striker runs up and presses. They call it high press. When, for example, it can be completely unsupported, it can be dislodged, it can be dumb. So they don't have intelligent pre designed pressing triggers, and the person takes initiative and does it, and that leads to a certain outcome. If not straight away, on the fourth or fifth attempt, it will. So, and from that, they see a shape and they declare it as a formation, which it can be just a simple rotation within the framework. Uh, in a nutshell, it leads to misjudgment of the performance of players it, and systems as well. It leads to misjudgment of performance or lack of it of the coach and the coaching staff. We also see oversimplified, dangerous narratives, and I dare say tactical oversimplification, almost reductionism. Basically, bottom line, guys, don't do that. Educate yourself enough to actually to separate at least the basics of what you see and break the game down into phases. Um, System itself, like talking about all that, because that all ties in into system and systems. It's a tactical operating code. So you just like I said before, it's a function that evolves dynamically. Roles of the players will depend on the zones, on timings, on sequencing, on opposition played, on instructions, because coaches will be giving instructions all the time. Um, somebody is continuously popping in and out. I like that. Sorry, I'm boring you guys. Um, naming something, especially naming something wrongly or oversimplifying things, it's not analysis, it's noise. It's confusing, misleading noise. Um, Next time you see somebody or you hear somebody discussing football and they're using terms like, again, we just discussed, like false nine, double pivot, without an- anchoring them to at least zone or function, yet better phase, that's not analysis. You're not analyzing. You are effectively you are imitating the vocabulary of analysis without the substance. So you're using the words, using the word stock of analysis, but you don't deliver any substance because everything you say is empty. And don't take it the wrong way. Think about it twice. Um, well, if there was anybody watching me now live, I guess I could ask if you guys want to maybe listen listen a little bit more. I I feel like I did not discuss enough. Um, I did not discuss enough of the double pivot. It's the one that really it's very crucial, and it and it highlights the base level of understanding of football. So I want to talk a little bit more about the double pivot because it's uh, it's one of those revolutionary concepts that, when applied correctly and understood correctly, creates a it provides for a far deeper understanding of the game. So double pivot, going back to it, it's a systemic buildup. Okay, let's talk about it in context of a buildup. Uh, it needs to involve at least two players. They operate on what's called a dual axis. Okay, because they can be staggered, they can be parallel, any which way combinations. Why are you doing this to me? Just keep going dark. But they need to operate on the double axis. Sorry. Um, Usually, not necessary, but usually it is used a lot in first or second phase of possession. Sometimes can be carried into third, but more as a um, backup role. Somebody just texted. Oh, Wayne. Good day, Evan. Just got here. Just watched this morning's show. Hey, Wayne. How you doing, buddy? Good to see you here. Yeah, I'm just. Um, I don't know if you watched the first part of the Buzzword talk, so I'm trying to explain a little bit about what tactics actually is, and because I'm, getting a little bit sick and tired of people think they know what they talk about, but they don't, and that creates a lot of misinformation. And then we have people parroting and copying each other without really knowing the essence, or at least basic level. So if you're interested, please stick around. I'll talk about it. So basically, what I was saying is that the players operate most effectively in double pivot through the first and second phase of possession, typically in zones 2 and 5 from memory, but not limited to. It can be, depending on your main areas of approach, it can be changed. Um, Basically, the role of double pivot is it's structural. It provides for a stable base right in front of the back line. It can be pushed further up the pitch as well, and it can assist in creating more angles for link-up play. Again, link-up play is a simplified version of a ball progression on a indirect angle. effectively. Um, when it comes to functionality, they provide A, circulation, B, ball progression, C, press resistance. So if your double pivot or whatever you call a double pivot does not hit those three marks that I just described, that's not a double pivot. At least they need to attempt to do that. Um, Another very important thing, but that's not quite the function of only and exclusively double pivot, but they need to provide transition control in transition. So transitional control. That's what Wrexham, for example, struggles with all the time because that's why they prefer to um, they prefer to bypass the midfield completely because that actually takes a lot of work from the coaching stuff. And just like I said, it takes years to train people up on understanding how it actually works. But if you use your double pivot correctly, and if you practice enough, and if you spend enough time in classroom and on the pitch practicing systems, you will increase your ball circulation effectiveness. You will increase your ball passing accuracy and ranges. You will increase your press resistance, not only in the midfield, but all over the pitch. You will improve, increase, widen your range of ball progression, and you will maintain transitional control even when the opponents are pushing high up the pitch and exploring the options for a well-analyzed press. Um, Tactically, um, it is it depends. It depends on context, and it changes. And most of the time, the changes with double pivot they based on how opponent is pressing, their shape, their triggers, the ability of the players, physical attributes of the players, condition of the pitch, color of the ball, depending on the whether you're playing under the floodlights or daylight, phase of play, depending on what phase of play you're operating with, and system inbuilt system overloads, so to speak. So basically, pre-designed areas of dominance that your opponent is trying to explore. Hope it makes sense. I know that I'm diving a little bit deeper right now, and it I guess will start sounding a little bit like Chinese. But please listen to it again because you will just listening to me week in week out. You will understand more what I'm talking about. Um, Not me, just not only me. Everybody who operates within professional football. The Going back to the crucial elements, you don't just have a double pivot, okay? Uh, you don't just have it because you just put two players there, whether it's this zone, that zone, out the flank, combination of two. You must instruct your players and teach them to receive the ball only in specific zones. That means that the ball passers, ball carriers, will have to time the carry of their ball and they will have to pass to certain players in the midfield only when they are there. So that, talking about timing in my previous episodes, when you have to time your ball carry, it leads to that because I told you guys before, possession play, it's not about the ball carrier. It's about people without the ball. They are responsible for possession more than the player carrying the ball. Um, if your double pivot doesn't provide extra minimum four passing lanes, not just to them, but the players who are covering for them because they're going to be moving, four extra passing lanes. I prefer more than four, to be honest, because they need to be dynamic. If they don't do that, it's just presence. They don't do anything. They just hold a double pivot. You as a coach or you as a fan who's watching, you need to look at them and you need to define their roles. Okay, definition can be, let's keep it simple. Is he an anchor? At least most of the time, or is he a progressor? So is he a progressive CM? Um, Once you define those roles, you start linking them to a larger positional structure. Without defining the roles, they are just, you just a parrot repeating double pivot, inverted fullback. Um, I'm going to explain a little bit more about how. Remember, I mentioned that any. Sorry, uh, somebody. I just convert what you are saying into rugby league context. I understand where you are going most of it. Perfect. And I said it so many times in this episode and in part number one. It does it works in every team sport, pretty much every team sport where your game depends on angles and there is one object that you carry. Okay, so please, Wayne, your contribution is very much appreciated. Just listen to what I'm saying and share your experience because you're an ex-professional athlete, and I can learn from you just as much as I can teach you. Maybe, hopefully, I can teach you something. Uh, Lost my train of thought again. Okay, going back to um, pivot. Uh, any two players can form a pivot. Okay, uh, but that doesn't mean that that pivot will be functional. Pivot can be formed by two defensive midfielders, center back stepping into the midfield and adds himself into the zone of the CM, and that creates a double pivot. Fullback inverting, like Zinchenko, with what his last name, Party, I think, natural CM forming that double pivot. As a coach, you have to find out who naturally on your team forms a double pivot without forcing them to play in the uncomfortable zone. In the like, they will be forced to play a little bit in there, but it needs to be more or less um, momentarily adjustable. So they need to feel like they know what they're doing. You can even create a double pivot with a winger who's tucking in and adds up onto the CM. Uh, Extremely rare, but also an option. Proper sweeper keeper, playmaker keeper, stepping up in extreme high possession style. It's rare, but it happens. And if you want it, it's there. Can happen too. So basically, what we're talking about here is that what matters isn't the identity of the players as such. It's the roles they perform, the zones, the phases. Not even that. It's the zones and half zones and spaces they occupy within the phase or a quarter phase or a half phase, depending on how you view your game. The challenge with football is that it's not like American football or rugby, for example. When in rugby you can't pass the ball forward by hand, right? So it's less accurate. So you're playing sideways. In American football, it stops all the time. In football, to be able to perform all that, you need to study. Like, it takes so long. You literally, that's why when I was saying all these years before, guys, when we started talking to Ruby, and I'm saying, like, you get to the point when you close your eyes and you know exactly where every single person on the pitch is and will be. It's You mentally get more tired than physically after, if you are a real tactical, operational, combinational, living organism football team, especially if you're playing in the midfield. Um, let's move to operational because I just spoke about operational. So operational requirements for an effective double pivot. Um, preferably, you have to maintain staggered roles. So one sits, one steps. Simplifying. Um, when you step, make sure that you step into half space. So you know that old concept, just again simplifying. Um, Spanish national team, Pep, when they introduced wide use of multiple double pivots and half spaces, lines on the pitch, vertical and horizontal. Any two players cannot occupy the same line either vertically or horizontally. Everybody needs to be on the angle. So if you if you step, you need to step into half space. So something that is challenged straight away. So you need to be challenging your opponent because if you don't, you are eliminating yourself from a passing lane, and you're pretty much skipping a phase of the game effectively, or taking yourself out of the phase of that game. Um, you When you stagger as well, you partially prevent horizontal predictability. So what's called the horizontal predictability. So that's, you know, Wrexham fans, Matty sideways. That's what's called the horizontal predictability. So negative, pointless passes, for instance, very predictable, and usually smart opposition will want you to do that, and they can let you do that all along. Sometimes you need to make that kind of pass. Sometimes you need to make a pass for the sake of a pass, if it's a part of a bigger plan. That's why possession is good, because it gives you options. No possession gives you no options. You got to fight for your options. If you have possession, doesn't matter what you do with the ball, you got options. It's in your hands. If at the same time you decrease the horizontal predictability, you increase vertical pass options. Not necessarily vertical straight up, because preferably you want to stay away from straight angles, but vertical, including half spaces, channels, overlaps. Zonal, talking about zones here, if you talking about the predictability up and down, and left and right. Your double pivot, players involved in double pivot, they must continuously float between vertical lanes. Usually it's lanes 2 and 4 from memory, but again, up to interpretation. They must add, like I mentioned before, while they do that, they must also add to the resistance to press. So effectively, um, under pressure, they must be press resistant. If your employment of double pivot has no significant effect or decreases your press resistance, you're not doing a double pivot. You're doing something wrong. Especially, especially against high and mid blocks. That is usually your test. If it works, if you are press resistant, double pivot works. At least certain functionalities. And very important, and I spoke about it before many times, you have to, and this is probably, well, that's the most important thing, is you have to, in double pivot, you have to make sure that the players are occupying positions that enable third man combinations. If you do not create multitude of third man combinations, you can be hitting everything else, and your double pivot will be pointless. Your team will become static. Doesn't matter how talented they are, doesn't matter how fast they are. Third man combinations are the key. And we're talking about usage of the midfield and positional play. If you just kick the ball long and overpass the midfield altogether, doesn't matter. Uh, from that, third man combinations. Let's develop that. Passing angles and triangulations. I love triangulations. Land nav. um, keep it simple. The shape of the double pivot, whether it's staggered or not, whether it's central or lateral, doesn't matter where they are. You must make sure that they facilitate as many natural triangles, especially with CBs, with fullbacks, with number 10s, as many as possible. It's their most and foremost jobs. So make sure that those triangles are there. Going back to those lines on the pitch, right? Lateral passes, so lateral sideways passes, should act as triggers for diagonal progression. Okay, so everybody talks about Messi sideways and all that, and when people say, "Oh, he passes sideways all the time," and it's bad, it's not necessarily bad because if he played high level football before for other teams from young years and he was well educated and he had a person who had bigger depth to his game coaching him, lateral pass, like I said before, sometimes pass for the sake of pass is a good thing because lateral pass usually indicates a trigger for a diagonal progression. So somebody needs to start moving to create a diagonal opportunity or two for a ball being played into the free area onto the runner or two. And usually it needs to happen simultaneously in a couple of spots on the pitch so that the opposition doesn't know which option you're going to take. I hope that makes sense. So each element of the game, when again people doing tactical analysis and they or talk about the drawbacks or shortcomings of a player and they highlight a certain element of the game, in professional high level football, it's not usually the necessarily the player's fault. It's the shortcoming of the coaching and the system. Hope that does make sense, guys. And uh, at the same time, so we're talking about the progression up diagonally at this stage. Um, you you're not slowing down circulation. You when you're playing your lateral pass from a double pivot, you don't. The aim is not to slow down the circulation. The aim is open up options, and your decisive action will be few steps and few zones later. So you're effectively creating a basis for the next phase. I hope that makes sense again. Um, at the same time, you're maintaining connections with the back line and effectively frontline. That's the job of a midfield, is to maintain connection, constant connection between the back line and the front line. They need to successfully be able to link up phase, build up phase needs to be successfully linked up to the midfield progression phase. That's the job. Again, Wrexham doesn't have it. They show glimpses of it when they're playing against weaker opponents, but as a rule, they don't. There is no link up there. That's why they bypass it. They try to win the ball back at the top. Um, your midfielders playing in the double pivot should be able to turn under pressure. So when they are playing a proper double pivot, turning under pressure for each of them should become easier, not harder. As if they can do that, they provide fluidity through the neutral zone and they prevent the team from becoming stagnant. So when, for example, like you're saying, we need to get faster, we're slow, um, even though we don't have too much possession. It comes from center midfield quite often because if your players can't turn under pressure, getting out and they are being press resistant, the team becomes stagnant. Everybody slows down. It's easier to progress up the pitch carrying the momentum rather than stop, start, stop, start, stop, start all the time. Again, simplifying things. In defense, they should be able to support what's called a rest defense or a still defense. Um, effectively, they occupy ball near the counter zones. Okay, so that's pretty much covering the basics of double pivot. Um, Goes without saying that they need to maintain communication and special and situational awareness all the time. They, uh, for instance, um, again, I said it too many times before. A lot of people say all the time, comms on the pitch, communication, talk. No, you don't. It's the same as pass to feet, pass to feet. You don't pass to feet. You do not pass to feet. Nobody asks for the ball to feet. If you do, you're a dinosaur. Or there are a couple of little situations when you do, but not you. it's just those parroting. People keep repeating those phrases, but they are empty. They're meaningless. They're actually wrong. Um, if they talk too much, y- your words lose meaning. So you should be able to pretty much have connection without talking. Look around, head on a swivel. You only talk in certain situations, and you taught to do that when it matters. If they both drift, for example, toward the same space, they will collapse the structure. And in this case, they need to communicate. If, for example, somebody is a couple of steps behind, they need to support one another to stop the structure from collapsing. That's a good opportunity to talk. Um, if neither of them is open to support the ball, possession most likely going to be broken. Even if they don't have the ball right now, they need to be able to support the progression through the phases and zones. That's when they need to talk. So continuously yapping like yeah here that's not like in high level. It's not what it's all about. Um, since we started talking about those things, we can talk about what actually happens when people kind of mess it up, when it goes wrong. Um, usually, and we see it a lot. Uh, I just convert what you're saying. You usually don't have much time for chit chat when the game is on. Yeah, usually don't. Usually don't. That's right. You're especially if it's a high speed game, you just have no time to chat. Um, when the double pivot is done wrong, most often you will see what's called a flat pivot. Okay, so it's not even a pivot anymore. It's just a flat line. No verticality, no angles. Players on the same predictable horizontal line, no angles for progressive passes. Lateral passes lead to nothing. And basically, you end up inviting central press. You fall into the what's called the central press trap. That's the most common fault uh, with a double pivot. Um, on top of that, contributing factor is usually wrong combinations of players, wrong profile pairing. You got let's say two ball winners, two fighters. They got no retention, but they're good at turning the ball over. But they will not provide you with a good enough tempo control. Um, who else? Uh, for example, if you have two deeper style playmakers who are conductors, they usually lack in athletic coverage. So your transitions and your turn on the ball will suffer. Uh, last season, Wrexham had a team of destroyers, for example. It's going to carry on into this season too. I can pretty much guarantee you that there is no changes there. So that's a huge problem with whatever double pivot want to call it. Um, from there on, since we're talking about last season, for example, no triangle support with CBs, so poor connectivity. You your press resistant structure collapses before you even manage to create it. It's already not there. Just like I said before, you almost automatically fall into a trap. If you have no vertical outlets, no diagonal outlets, you are stagnant, and that leads to fullback dependency. So you gotta, like they did it so many times before. They try and poke up, then they pass the ball back to fullback, and he launches it up. Happens every game, pretty much every play, every time they half try to build from the back. Rewatch any game, you will see it straight away. Like it's just the fact that the coach can't fix that is Sunday league, honestly. Um, I'm getting sidetracked. Um, if you take the other extreme of that, and you over rely on pivots. So, for example, you have very good combination. You found very good profiles of your players for a successful pivot. If you over rely on that, you create an isolation further up the zones. So, if the double pivot becomes your only build up option, which would be a good problem to have, for example, for Wrexham. Um, if that's your only build-up option and there is no number 10, for example, dropping in on the angle, preferably, or there is any all the other third man combinations and third man contributions are ineffective, the forwards become isolated. In our case, for example, they are too isolated, two meaning also, but that's why the decision is to deliver the ball to them via air delivery. Um, Basically, is the result is that you start relying on long balls too much. So you are afraid of forced turnovers. So you're afraid to make that mistake in the build up, and you just start relying on the long ball. And that's exactly what happens. And you can still have a double pivot. You know that, but you still be playing long balls. So when you see now people commenting, "Oh, we're signing all these midfielders, and then no, double pivot, this and that," they will still be playing long balls because every other feature and parameter is not met. And to meet those parameters takes years, which we had, but we didn't use them. Um, Basically, teams who get that wrong, this entire concept of double pivot, they are easily pressed, especially in the center. So vulnerable center press in the center of defense. That last game, friendly game, very vulnerable in the middle of the pitch, down low in the first couple of zones, in the central zones, very fragile. That's a direct sequence of that. You become slow and predictable and repetitive, which is exactly what we have been all this time. You lose midfield control before you even get a chance to earn it. Exactly what happens, completely bypass the midfield. And you mostly get counterattacks coming through your center. And you don't, at the same time, use your center at all. So you start using your flanks. And the only option is run up the flank, cross in. Sounds familiar? Anybody? That's when people talk about, okay, let's do tactical dive in. Like that's what I'm giving you right now, guys. Is like I don't even have any graphics. Like it takes a long time and a big work. So when you are going in for technical analysis, this level, what I'm presenting to you right now, is bare minimum. If you want to be a football specialist of most basic level, this is the bare minimum understanding. And then you have to have all your visual clues and whatnot. And what do I can carry on again, man. I'm going over an hour. I can carry on. So, to finish up on the double pivot, let's close that chapter. A double pivot is not a coincidence of proximity of two players. It's a controlled, coordinated, pre-designed, evolving, pre-active build-up construct that is embedded into a team system or systems. On its own, double pivot is just as useful as tits on the bull if it's not embedded into the system or systems. Hence, it requires integration with wider players and positional play. It requires good understanding, good level of zonal distribution. It requires designed and defined roles according to the phase, ball location, and zone, and spaces. And you need to incorporate that, all of that, with press resistant structure. Because if under even under very little amount of press, your structure collapses, double pivot is useless. Simply placing two midfielders or two bodies or deep, let's put it this way, does not create a pivot. It actually will create congestion if it's unstructured. It will almost be a hindrance. A real pivot, when implemented correctly, gives you tempo and tempo control, gives you smooth and controlled transitions, also shields your transitions, stops them from being predictable. It helps you manipulate the press, so set up false pressing triggers. It literally initiates your phase transitions, so it controls the entire game, the flow of the game. If you can on demand initiate phase transitions without asking your opposition for a permission, you control the game. But without those properties that I just described, it will become a dead zone that is useless, and it will be safer to bypass that zone, which is exactly what we've been doing. So tactically useless and structurally becomes more dangerous than anything else, to be honest. Any questions on double pivot, class? Forgive me my formalities. Shall I carry on? Okay. Actually, you know what? I need to go and double check on a couple of things. I will do a part 3. I just need to. I don't want to be repeating myself. I will see what I can do tonight and give you a part 3 while I have a little bit of time. Thank you so much, guys, for your attention. Wayne and everybody else who watched during, because I saw a few people popping in and popping out. Thank you. If you have any questions based on what we have just discussed, if you want to know more about certain aspects, please drop me a question. I will respond, and I will give you like if I don't have an answer straight away, I will definitely do my research, and I will get back to you. I do have a couple of friends who are currently either playing or coaching, and I can always talk to them to ask for sort of latest and greatest updates without relying on just standard mass media. But yeah, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and I will see you soon.